That pot looks so familiar.
Hi, Vivian.
Hello,
We're
Alexandra.
So we're in the past. We've been born back into the past.
Yes, that's for sure. That's for sure. Yeah, actually, there was a cult novel called Time and Again. Does anybody remember that? It was in the 70s or 80s. Anyway, it was a time experiment in which they put somebody in an apartment in the Dakota that was empty on January 6, 1888, and this man is wished back into time to solve a murder. But the important thing was how they kept that apartment up for 1888, right? So let's hope something like that happens to us, right?
Well, to go back to the Dakota, that might be a little bit
a little bit better.
We're in a 1930s Italian apartment, and it is, I think the word is small.
Small?
What do you think?
Yeah.
Accurate?
Well, I think it's oppressively tiny.
I mean,
actually, the building is what, from the 1870s or something, isn't it? Probably.
1860s, yeah.
1860s. Yeah. Imagine this thing was up in the 1860s. And imagine probably 5, 6, 7, 10, 11 people came trudging into this from Ellis Island.
I mean, like your ancestors, who? Your grandmother?
Yeah, my grandmother. Well, my mother. My mother was 8 years old when they came to America in 1912. Mm-hmm. Yeah. No. Yeah, she was 8 years old.
From Russia?
From Russia.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so they came to Cherry Street, mm-hmm. to the Lower East Side, and they came on a Saturday, and there were like 11 of them. My grandmother had 18 children. My mother was the youngest of 18 children. 10 of them died in childbirth or in infancy, but there were about 11 people came to that first apartment. The grandparents and older brothers and who had been here already. And then the younger children, among whom was my mother. So they came on a Saturday, and my grandfather was a very religious Jew, and he wouldn't take public transportation. They walked from Ellis Island. I mean, not from Ellis, from Battery Park.
I was going to say,
yeah, across the river,
Island,
right? On the water.
Yes, on the water. That might have been a religious conversion moment, but no, they remain Jews. Okay.
That's true. No, they walked from Battery Park.
So to the suitcases in their hands, and bindles over their shoulders.
That's right. That's right. The whole caricature, right? Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And they came to, I guess, something that looked like this.
Yeah.
I know my mother told me she it was the baby of this whole bunch. So she slept on 2 chairs in the kitchen for a couple of years until they started growing up and leaving. But they all lived like this for a long time. And the first step out of it was Williamsburg. Mm-hmm. That was the first step up around, mm-hmm. and then the Bronx.
So your mom, did she move to the Bronx as a young woman?
No, as a married woman.
As a married
No, as a young woman, she lived in Williamsburg, mm-hmm. and worked here on Delancey Street as a bookkeeper in a bakery, the Victory Bakery.
Wow. Did you ever visit?
No. At one point, my mother herself said that I was the repository of her life. She couldn't remember anything, and I couldn't forget anything.
Yeah.
So my head was filled with all the information. I've never understood people who say they don't know anything about their parents' past. I never stopped asking questions, and she answered. So I knew everything. I knew everything. I knew who lived in every apartment at any given moment. Mm-hmm. I knew all their quarrels. I knew all their sexual transgressions.
And then you wrote them all down.
And I wrote them all down. But I only put a fraction of them in Fierce Attachments.
Yes, you gotta edit the past to get it to come through. But I want to go to Fierce Attachments in a second. But stay with me in your mother's trajectory. So she's a bookkeeper. She's working in the Bronx, commuting down here.
No, she was living in Williamsburg.
Right. Okay,
commuting
so
across the Williamsburg Bridge.
The
Yeah, and she often walked across the bridge. Mm-hmm. And by then she was a working girl of the 1920s, and I had photographs of her in a midi blouse and a tie and knickers.
Ooh.
Yeah, just exactly. It was like a $2.99 version of whatever the fashions were uptown. The working girls on the lower, they knew how to do it, and they were seamstresses, and they made these great outfits for themselves and each other. She had a bob.
Did she curl her hair? Was that the thing, or was it?
No, she didn't. It was straight. It was like they are today.
Yeah,
It was a bob with a bangs and like
yeah.
that, right. And it was all for show. She was a terrible flirt, and she was in fact terrified of sex. She flirted until she was 90. And then she would, if somebody made a move on her, not at 90, but in early days, she'd say, "What do you think I am?" You know, that kind of thing. Yeah.
And so she was working as a bookkeeper down here, and then what happened?
Then she met my father. Whatever happens to a working girl in the 1920s, a nice Jewish girl. She was married at 24. They thought she was an old maid.
Yeah, for that time she kind of was.
She was. And they lived in Williamsburg for the first couple of years, I think. Mm-hmm. And then they moved to the Bronx, I think around about 1927 or 8, something like that. And moving to the Bronx was an expedition. It was, my grandparents thought they were leaving the city. It was like leaving the city. Then when would they see each other again? But anyway, that was the trajectory of most of these immigrants. They went to Brooklyn or the Bronx. And then one by one, all these neighborhoods got filled in. And my mother would never, I'll tell that story I just told you. Yeah. My mother would never come back to the Lower East Side no matter what. So we had relatives who lived in Israel and used to come to New York a lot. And they knew about Orchard Street. Mm-hmm. And my mother was already living in Chelsea, not far from where I live now. And these relatives would stay with her and say, "Where is Orchard Street?" And she said, "Orchard Street? Yeah, they wanted to buy a refrigerator on Orchard Street, clothes, or whatever the hell it was. People came and bought stuff down here, all kinds of stuff." So she would walk them down to Houston Street and point across the street. She would not cross Houston Street, no matter what.
She wasn't going back.
She wasn't going back.
Yeah.
She hated it all. She did not, she never romanticized anything about any of that world. But sometimes, when we see footage in movies of the teeming streets mm-hmm. that were really teeming, it's horrifying. I mean, it's just horrifying. It's like, people just training themselves on getting through from one end of a street to another through these crowds that are endless and timeless, and there's no relief from it, none. So
yeah, one thing that really strikes me being here is that and this is obvious, but viscerally in the space you feel it. No privacy. You're never going to have a second alone. We just came in here passing the toilet on the stairs. You're just...
The concept of being alone was non-existent.
Right, exactly, yeah.
No one could even imagine it. I really do believe people had to be taught. Somebody came in from the outside and said, you can live with more space, whatever, you don't have to live like this. You don't really have to live like this. But by that time, that's a huge step up, just that ability to imagine. It's really, it was just living in the herd. It was a herd mentality.
Yeah, I think if you went through it, you're not going to romanticize it in the way that later you can pick and choose in your
right, what to remember.
But maybe,
right.
You don't romanticize it either. Maybe that's because you absorbed your mother's
toughness.
Reality. Yeah, well, her toughness for sure, and also, as you're saying, you absorbed her stories and you kind of got what was...
Yeah.
Because that's something, so fierce attachments, which we're here to discuss.
I didn't know that. Yeah.
Well, we're here to discuss anything you want to discuss, but we're going to talk about fierce attachments just a little bit, in part because
kills us. Yeah.
We're not leaving this small table until we discuss fierce attachments, Vivian. Fierce attachments is, I actually wonder, it's a bestseller in the bookstore here at the Tenement Museum, and I wonder if it's a bestseller in other bookstores, if there's like a, different, but it seems like it's its natural habitat, that people would come to the Tenement Museum and leave with fierce attachments.
Well, I can imagine that.
But what's so interesting about Fierce Attachments is it's not a sentimental book, and it's not a let's go back to the past and cozy up to it and think about how play our violins and fiddle on the roof or whatever.
Yeah.
So why do you think people are still not just still, but I think the book is as popular as it's ever been. And
are there sentimental books about this kind of life that are still written? I think that sentimentality is a thing of the past altogether. I don't think anybody writes that kind of thing anymore.
You think so?
No,
Oh,
do they?
Yes. Oh, yes.
Oh, I'm a protected creature.
Yeah, self-protected. You only want to read the good stuff. But
yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Oh, but there. Oh, you mean the popular?
Romanticization of the,
you mean practically
past.
genre novels or romanticizing?
Crossover.
Yeah.
We're not here to cast.
We won't go there. That's right. No names. No names.
Well, I guess what I'm getting at is, people feel connected to to family past. I feel connected to my family's past. People do to different degrees, and certainly you do, but without sentimentality.
Yeah. Well, there's a difference between being connected to a family past and writing a book in which you use the family past to write a book, to say something else. I never set out to write about the family. I set out to use me and Mama and Nettie to struggle through, to say something. And, it was my apprentice work, actually, and certainly in memoir. And I taught myself how to write that kind of book by slowly discovering that I was never really writing about me and Mama. I was using me and Mama to figure out something.
And what were you trying to figure out?
Well, that took me a long time, too, to figure out what I was trying to figure out. Actually, the last scene of that book was in my head before I even started. And that's a scene in which she's lying on the couch. We've had, we're both pretty old already, and we've gone through the ringer. We've had 5 million fights. I've struggled against this, that, and so has she. And she says to me, "Why don't you go? Just go. I'm not holding you." And I know that's the truth. And I made use of the fact that it was late in the afternoon and the light was coming in a certain way, so it shadowed the room and it shadowed us. And I know she's right, and I'm half in, half out. And I swear to God, that whole scene, it's not so amazing that it actually happened. You can describe it in very homely terms, which I just have. But I knew that was to be the end. I'm half in, half out. She's not holding me. Why can't I go? So by the time I figured that out, I was already struggling with it for a year. And then I wrote to drama. I knew I had to earn that scene. And that's how I wrote. I mean, it was never that I wanted to discuss me and Mama any more than a novelist would have wanted to make the characters. I always thought that a memoir bore this strong resemblance to storytelling and to novel writing, and that it was a piece of experience you were going to structure, and that was your obligation, to structure it. You owed yourself, the reader, everybody, the organizing of a piece of experience. Just as an emotional insight triggers a novelist, I thought it was the same with the memoirs. Thank God I did. I was on the right track. And then beyond that, then the question was, well, what was the experience? It took me forever to realize, when I was teaching, that it was so hard to make students understand what you meant when you said to them, you have to find the experience and then you have to structure it, then you have to organize it. And they said, what do you mean, find the experience? Well, they never understand that it's really kind of a subject that they've stumbled on, but not an experience. To extract the experience, as you well know, in writing a profile, you do exactly the same thing. It's a mass of material, which is the subject, and then you find the heart of it, or
the theme.
The theme, yeah, exactly. You would call the theme. In writing the book, I don't know if I would call it the theme, but I would certainly say the organizing principle. What am I going to wind it all around? And that took me at least 2 separate hunks of time to figure out. And then I knew that once I had it, I had every single thing that I wrote had to be written in order to earn that ending. And that I focused on it almost obsessively.
And so would you say that the organizing principle or theme that you were getting at through the book is why you can't leave the past? Is that what the theme was?
Oh, no. Sorry, I lost track of what we were both saying. Well, yes. I couldn't leave Mama because I had become Mama. I couldn't leave Mama because, and that led to a deeper psychological understanding, which was what we all understand. You spend your life trying to break free of the identities that you assume through a parent. You know, I mean, that's our struggle. That's it. That's what an achieved life is all about. I mean, that struggle to leave, you know, to become yourself, whatever that self is. I would say that if that's what you mean by the past, the psychological past, yeah. It's interesting when I think that I was the only girl on the block who didn't just become a secretary, get married, and live not too far from Mama for the first year or so of life. I mean, they all followed the same trajectory, and they went to Long Island.
Yes, exactly, and may still be there.
Thanks. Right. First they were, a couple of neighborhoods away in the Bronx, one or two, and then finally Long Island. Yeah.
Well, you know, what's so interesting is that the why of why you didn't, I think, is another reason that you were writing the book. At least this is how I read the book. And, you know, we were just talking about living communally all together. You, of course, have lived alone for years and years and years. You've experienced this aloneness and reveled in this aloneness that wasn't even a concept. Well, okay, maybe I'm romantically projecting onto you sentimentally.
Revel no.
Made use. But made use of your aloneness. I mean, you did try out married life 2 times.
Not in good faith. I have to say, not in good faith. I married twice. 2 men I never would have lived a whole life with.
It's hard to have a conception of what a whole life is sometimes.
Yeah.
I mean, also you were kind of living the life you lived is not a life that was a notion when you decided to live it.
No, not at all.
That's a huge difference.
And I never really decided, you know, no one ever decides to live alone. I challenge anyone on that score. You never decide that. You say yes to this and no to that, yes to this and no to that, and then suddenly there you are. But it is a decision to accept, or else frantically fight it. You know.
Or you might discover you prefer it.
You might discover you prefer it. Yeah, that is true. I really have no clear views on it. I only know what happened. I don't exactly know how to account. I don't know how to account for it, and I don't know how well I've done at it. But I do know that I've learned things from it. And that when I say 2 men I would never have lived a life with, you know, it's not very far into any relationship where you grasp whether or not this is essentially sexual or psychological infatuation, or it has the grounding for a real connection. Right. Am I saying that right? Yeah. Something that will last. That is. So in each case, it was attraction rather than something solid. I mean, both of these men were possessed of traits that I couldn't have lived with for a lifetime, and I the same. I'm not putting anything on them. They were all very good people. Nobody ever oppressed me. Every man I was ever with wanted more for me than I wanted for myself. So mine was the typical struggle of my generation, like, who am I? What am I doing here? If you cared to ask those questions. I mean, or if not if you cared, if you were driven to ask those questions, which I was.
But instinctively you were driven.
Yes. And if it hadn't been for feminism, God knows what would have happened.
Because, so what did feminism do? It let you know other people were asking the same questions.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. It gave me company. That's what it did for all of us. I mean, you wouldn't have a movement. You wouldn't have any change. You wouldn't have anything that has happened if some astonishing, mysterious moment had not coalesced in which a few thousand people saw the same thing at the same time and felt driven to act on it. That's the important thing, and nobody has an answer for that. I went through what I went through. All I knew was I wanted to write. So I wanted to write, but at the same time, I was a child of the working class and the left, and it seemed natural to me to move towards a newspaper like the Village Voice. If I hadn't had that particular, proclivity, I would have gone somewhere else and become another kind of writer. I don't know what would have happened, but it was the moment, the moment, the place. It all came together, and it gave me space in which to see. I hungered for this more than for being married.
And what is this? Writing, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah. I don't really know any more to say about that. Why there was a choice involved, but there was.
Well, at the time, certainly there was. I mean,
yeah,
part of the reason...
Many of us.
Well, I'm sure people express this to you, that part of the reason that it doesn't seem like such a stark choice anymore is because of...
Because of us.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I have a 60-year-old niece.
I'm not saying you did everything right. I just want to be very clear about that. We're not going to give you the whole thing, but some things we'll give you.
I was just going to say, I have a 60-year-old niece who says, Auntie Viv, you gave me my life. And she's a woman I admire immensely, incredibly, well, I have two of them, and I admire them both. And they're both very accomplished women. And I do feel proud. I feel like, I feel God knows what their lives would have been like if it wasn't for us. Yeah. Yeah, I don't think I in particular did anything. I mean, I certainly was not the activist that many others were, but in general, yeah, ours was I opened my mouth, and
yeah, you opened your mouth and you lived a different way.
Yeah.
And what did your mother make of you living?
Terrible,
this way?
terrible.
You were breaking with a very, I would say, millennia old way of living.
After I wrote the first big piece on the new View, the next great moment in history is theirs. My mother said
Explain
to me,
a little bit about that piece.
Oh, why then I had a job at the Village Voice. Yeah, I didn't have a job. I had asked for a job, and they said freelance for us for a while, and then we'll see. And one of the first things that the editors said to me was, there were all these chicks gathering out on Bleecker Street. They're women's libbers. I said, what's that? And chicks? Well, that's what they said. There were all these chicks out there on Bleecker Street, and they call themselves women's libbers. Go out and find out what they're all about. So I went out, and I found Kay Millett, Susan Brown Miller, T. Grace Atkinson, Myrna Lamb, 1,000 others, Gloria Steinem. Everybody was milling around one way, or Shalamith Firestone. It was a remarkable moment. And this was 1969, 70. Yeah. So I got converted in 2 seconds. I mean, in 2 seconds I saw, well, as I wrote, they were saying many things. I only heard one thing, and that is that women by nature do not take their brains seriously. That was the one sentence that just formed in my head, and I was off the ground.
They were saying women by nature do not take their brains seriously?
Well, everything they were saying, they weren't saying it literally, but they were saying it in the sense that they were announcing, we are second class. Yeah. This is who we are. This is what our history is. This is how we got here. We're raised to be nothing. We're raised to believe that all we want to be is mothers and wives. But what I heard was, gee, they're saying that by nature, we're being told we don't take our brains seriously.
Right, being told, right.
Yeah, and that was literally my single article of faith for years. We used to say, Ellen Willis and I were two of the major feminist writers at The Voice at the same time. She took sex, I took work. We would divide.
Those are the two big topics.
Those are the two big things. All I thought about was how
they intersect rather dramatically.
When they do. Yes, they do.
Yeah.
They do.
Well, those are the two.
With very different effects. Yeah. But that was the territory. And these are just our predilections, She was part of the world which I was so foreign to be. She was a part of the world that concentrated on women's sexuality. Which I never thought about for 5 minutes before. I just did it. I didn't think about it. There were, many Many of us. But I was really passionate about work, about the fact that that I was not raised to be a worker, a serious worker. And that as much as I wanted to work, I could not make myself a disciplined writer. I mean, which I've struggled with for 40 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you weren't raised to be a worker because you were raised.
I was raised to believe that the most important thing in a woman's life was love and marriage. It was nice that you had a job. It was nice that you went to work, especially if the husband didn't make enough money, or if he died, or if he left you, or some dramatic event occurred to derail you. Then it was good that a girl should have a trade. That's what my mother called it, working for a woman, a trade. And what she expected when she sent me to City College was that I would come out a teacher. She thought a girl went in one door marked college and came out another one marked teacher. And when I turned out not a teacher, she felt swindled.
Yeah, and she discovered it rather late.
Yeah, well, upon graduation. She said, "You mean you're not a teacher?"
Yeah.
I said, "No, I'm not a teacher. What have you been doing there all these years? Reading novels." So that was what I was supposed to do.
That's very interesting, though, because that to me already signals, the middle class aspirations of your parents, because we're still talking about coming from the working class movie. But, you've written that before you knew you were Jewish, before you knew you were female, you knew that you came from the working class. So it almost, your parents were, and they were passionate socialists.
Yes.
Communists, socialists.
Yeah. They were fellow travelers of the Communist Party.
Right, but they had middle class, aspirations for you.
They didn't know it. They didn't. Yeah, they didn't. Of course, an education was to have a better life. Those are the words. They did not have any particular values, and they weren't occupied with any specific gaining of any specific elements that would define a middle class life. They weren't saying, get stuff. They weren't, or anything like that. They weren't saying, gee, it'll be wonderful to have money. They wanted me to not be living in a tenement apartment in the Bronx. Right. They wanted me to be living not on Long Island, on the Upper West Side.
Fancy.
Marjorie Morningstar, right?
Right.
Yeah, not really, but along those lines. Yeah. I mean, that idea was, and if all she thought was that I should become a school teacher, and marry a man who made a living, a nice man, an intelligent man, not a dummy, and no one who was gross. And I should love him. Everything. She had every fairy tale in her head that was a necessity. But above all, the married part was the central part. No question about that.
Yeah. So you were a double disappointment to her.
More than that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I'm bringing us back now because I distracted you. My apologies from talking about her reaction to you being a writer, to you being a feminist, to you to this being the principal concerns of your life, and also the principal sources of joy in your life in a big way.
Oh, excitement.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wouldn't say joy, but I would say excitement. Life felt very alive.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, she said to me, Vivian, you have to stop writing this stuff. You'll never get married again. So I said,
she was right on the one hand.
Well, yes, but
not for the reasons she might have thought.
I said to her, well, if I do that, what is it? Who do you think is going to marry me? And who is the me he's going to marry? I mean, how will I be presented in an honest way to any man or any lover or anything? That stopped her. And I said, don't you see you're asking me to put behind the door a part of myself that I'm just beginning to discover that is vital to living a truly better life. And she was intelligent enough. I mean, she was very ignorant and very childish and incredibly strong-willed, but she wasn't stupid at all. And she listened. She stopped dead, and I had a lot of passionate sentences in those days. I could talk the rhetoric of feminism by the yard, but she listened. She listened, and she began to see what I had done and what I wanted to do. And I don't remember if I ever wrote this or not in Fierce Attachments about her being in her 80s and intensely white-haired. I keep wanting to get to where she is. It's not white yet. She's about in her 80s, and she has a cold, and I've come to visit her, and she's sitting in her bathroom. We both are at the kitchen table, and she's drinking a cup of tea and holding the teacup in her hand and looking down, and we're remembering when she got a job when I was 8 years old, and it was the Second World War was still on. She went out and got a job, which my father resented immensely. He did not want her to work, which was pathetic. I mean, considering they were communists and they were working class, but he was ashamed that his wife should work. Anyway, she was hungry to work. It wasn't even for the money. She wanted barely to get out of the apartment. So she went out and got a job, and she came home and she said, "I've got a job," like a kid at the dinner table. And my father said, "No, that's no good. Why? The children need you." And I say, "No, we don't." She worked, yeah, go. It was exciting. I became a kid with a key around her neck, and she worked for 8 months, and then she stopped. So here she is in her 80s with the teacup and the white hair, and I say, "Ma, what would you do if it was today?" And Papa said, "You had to not work, you have to stop working." She looked into the tea, she looked up, and she said to me, "I'd tell him to go fuck himself." Which was a victory for all of us. And maybe even for Papa, if he'd been around.
Yes.
Yeah. But she was one of those women who was always hungry to work and always essentially unhappy, but passionate about her own love affair with my father. That was her sweetness, that was her significance, that was who told her who she was, that made her Cinderella and him Prince Charming, and all in a tenement apartment in the Bronx. And that actually was true, which made her a lousy mother. I mean, she wasn't interested in me at all. I mean, it was just, they had their own aura. They did this remarkable thing. It was a Laurentian marriage. It was like something out of Lawrence.
In what sense?
In what the all-in-allness that they made of a sexual passion. They made it a world in which they could, and nobody around them did. Everybody in the tenements were miserable.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing. I mean, you sort of understand why romance would have had this very powerful hold on your mother if she found true romantic and sexual love, which it seems like
she did. She did. It didn't take her it didn't liberate her, certainly. Right. It didn't take her out of, she was where she was, sitting in that tenement apartment when she knew that she was smarter and she was eager for the world, as small as the world would be if she had a job downtown, which she did after he died. And he died when she was 46, I was 13.
And it was a catastrophe.
It was a catastrophe. But she loved working. And, she pulled on her girdle and put on her gray pinstriped suit and her black suede wedgies and went downtown. So she
didn't have the haircut anymore?
No.
Okay.
She had an awful permanent.
You change with the times.
She went downtown and she got a job like that.
What was her job?
She worked. She did essentially arithmetic. She worked in an accounting department in the central office in New York of a chain of local dress stores that were all over the country, but whose headquarters were in New York. She did that. But she did it with great joy. Actually, she loved working. She loved it. She hated being a housewife, but she adored him, and that was the life. Yeah.
Well, she got to have different chapters, and so did you, in her life.
She got to have different chapters. Yeah. She didn't make anything of it. She was so insistent on, since Papa and that love affair in her head was the central experience, when he died and cut it short, she did this completely unnatural thing. She decided to extend it forever. She decided to pay more attention to, she became like somebody who was constantly praying over the dead.
She was in mourning.
She was forever. She was in mourning for what she had lost.
She was in mourning, but at the same time, you say she went down and she got the job and she got out of it at some point.
Well, she'd go downtown. She'd be this person downtown. Then the day would finish, and sometimes she'd stay and have dinner with people she worked with. then she'd come home. The minute she got into the house, she'd lay down on the couch and become depressed Bessie all over again. You mean she could? She was really a remarkable example of what you can do when you're determined on psychological depression, when you're just determined to be miserable.
And did she know that you were going to write about her and you were going to write about your relationship?
Oh, no, that
took her. So how did you introduce that topic to her?
Well, it took me a long time. How? We were walking. I said, Mom, I have to tell you, I'm writing a book. Yeah, I'm writing a book, Ma. By this time, she was used to the idea that I might write books. And it's about us. She stopped dead. You can imagine. She said, what? I said, I'm writing a book about our relationship. She said, what's to write? What's to... So we went around the block 6 times over this until she finally grasped it. And then she would get moody naturally. She'd go home and brood, and call me up and say, why are you writing this? Does the whole world know you hate me? I mean, she said that 100 times to me. And that was it. It was either it was either mine or it wasn't mine. And every writer finally makes that decision. I used to know a novelist she was always using family material, but she was a novelist. You would have thought she would feel freer. She did not. She said, I always write as if everybody was dead. Nobody, Well, you can't do that. I mean, or the people who get sued the most by parents are novelists, not memoirists.
Why do you think that is?
Because the novelists feel free to be more wretched, more miserable, more accusatory, more insulting, more injurious.
Yeah, because they're doing it under the guise of
they think,
but the truth is right there.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, descriptive work in a novel can do a lot more damage than anything in it. Well, maybe not. It's all the same. I mean, in other words, it comes to the same thing. When people recognize themselves in a book, and they are the parents of the protagonists, or something like that, or just characters in the book who are modeled on themselves. There's nobody who ever sees themselves modeled in a book that doesn't feel bad, doesn't feel angry, very often angry. I wrote a book on Egypt. It was my first book, actually, and I knew many people there by the time I wrote that book. I came home and wrote what I thought were very fair-minded portraits of the people I'd known, and half of them wanted to sue me.
Really?
Yeah. Well, people don't see themselves as you see them.
That is very
Which
true.
of us? Yeah. It's just like me telling you before. I heard myself the other day on a podcast, right. And I thought, my God, is that me? Yeah. No, that's not me. I'm going to sue Adam. He made me sound like that.
I don't know if you get much damages, but it's the thought that counts.
But yes, it's the thought that counts.
Well, it's true what you said. It's my feeling of it, and I've been thinking about it lately, is that you can take what you want from other people, but you have to be prepared for the consequences. And in many cases, the consequences are going to be rupture, and they're going to be distress, and they're going to be harm. And to not acknowledge that is childish in some way. And
well, if my mother had stopped talking to me or had sued me, I would have been more shocked than anything in the world. I felt that my motives were honest. I did not think for 1 minute I was writing to trash her.
No.
Yeah, and I thought she would have the wit to see that.
And did she?
Oh, on and off.
Yeah. So what was
every other day?
Every other day. So okay.
Oh yeah.
So
she not only read it
for the rest of her whole life. Yes.
Yeah, She used to walk around New York signing it, and I said, Ma, you can't do this.
That's pretty good.
She said, why not? I said, you didn't write it. She said, without me, you didn't have a book. I mean, you couldn't.
I'd say checkmate.
Yeah, right. That's right.
Yeah.
But I did trust my motives. I did think I was extremely careful never to praise myself at her expense, never to write. I was incredibly conscious of that it was immoral in every way, but more important, it was bad writing. That I should ever come out looking good at her expense, that I should be seen as the victim, or she the victimizer, or anything remotely like that. Mommy dearest, or is selling a score. Because I knew that I wasn't out for that. When I said fierce attachments, I meant it. Hard truths. But that's all, hard truths. So I trusted that, and I trusted she'd have the wit to see that. And as I say, every other day she did. One day she said, you've just told the truth. I see exactly what you mean. No kidding. That's fantastic, Ma. 2 days later, you've held me up to ridicule. Now the whole world knows. Fuck you. They're just models. I mean, whoever we write about, but as you say, you have to be prepared to take the consequences if there are consequences to be had. I've been very careful to disguise sufficiently almost everyone I've ever written about. You have a good job. You don't have to disguise, a really good job. You don't have to disguise anybody. And you let them hang themselves.
Well, yeah, if they can make it harder, because as you say, people may not see themselves as you see them.
Have you ever had any trouble over any of the profiles you've written?
I don't think so, but it could yet come to pass.
Well, sure.
Well, you could, I tend to, for instance, when I profile you, I want to think, oh, how do you see things? And how do you, I don't need to go about showing you that you're seeing things wrong. There's a different kind of profile where you're profiling a subject to whom you have some kind of antagonism, and you're there to reveal with you, or a writer or an artist, I want to think, well, how does let's explain how this person is seeing and doing their work.
That was great.
That said, I don't know if you read the piece I wrote about
Yes,
you.
I did.
Okay, so that's why we're sitting here at this table very quickly.
Yeah.
Because it's also fair game to just say, because I don't want to have anything to do with it. But, it wouldn't be, it strikes me that if your mother had some kind of just over-the-top, wonderful, glowing reaction, that's not even a possibility that could have happened.
Oh, no.
And it would have, in some weird way, nullified the whole book. It seems like her reaction allowed the book to continue and to have the life it has. Because you got it right, and she saw that, and she didn't like some part of it, but another part she felt seen by. I mean... Yeah.
To tell you the truth, once the book was published, she was beside the point. I didn't think anymore about, because as I say, our relationship was so much deeper and so much on such a steady course, and bound by her essential ignorance of the world. I mean, she was living in a bubble in her head. She was living in the projects. She was living. She didn't have any real idea of the life of the book out in the world. It was just a thing that had happened, and then it didn't happen anymore. It didn't have consequences for her or for us. It did not. The book had its life out in the rest of the world, but not with her. And that's a question for 40 years. People have been saying to me, so what did your mother think when this book was published? The truth of the matter is, well, as you say, it could have had consequences, but in this case it didn't. And I knew somebody else who wrote a memoir about herself and her mother was in a rage. And she said to her mother, Mom, it's just a book. It's art, Mom, it's art. And her mother said, what do you think I am, a dummy? So they had a terrible time. I mean, that mother was outraged. And I guess...
Yeah, I mean, a shared story is shared property to some degree, and anyone can do what they want with it, and it's yours, too. I mean, primarily it's yours, but it's... Yeah.
Well, these are old questions, right? The business of intellectual property, of who owns what.
Or emotional property.
Or emotional property. That story recently in the Times about the writer, the two writers, that was really interesting.
What did you make of it?
I thought in the end that the woman who was the model for the whole thing, the writer with the kidney transplant, I thought in the end she was wrong. I thought in the final analysis that the woman who wrote the story had every right to say she did not have she overstepped her bounds. There were things she did not have the right to publish the letter, something that was clearly that was clearly a joint property, and that in any other situation would have been negotiated, and that was wrong. But she certainly had the right to use the circumstances as a premise for. I believed her when she said I was writing about race. I mean, I was writing a story in which that became an instrumental piece of business to show a piece of race, subliminal racism. I thought that was right. And I thought the other one had become really unhealthily obsessed with, and that it had more to do with her own inability to write than anything else.
And what did you
She
think
wasn't
about
writing.
the writer's denial that the story was based on her until that was revealed?
It was a weakness. I didn't say I like her.
I'm just curious.
Yeah, no, I thought she had weak character. I mean, she didn't have good character, but I mean the issues, neither of them, or none of us. I mean, right? Put me on the stand with something, and I'll sound terrible. Just the issues, just to figure out what were the issues. What has happened with them? Do you know?
I don't know what
they gone to law?
I don't know. I mean, well, it's funny actually because you're talking about suing, and I think one thing that story shows is that suing doesn't get you very far.
No.
But it might get all your dirty laundry aired. So
that's right.
So be careful when you resort to the law.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's a very interesting. I mean, it is one of the age-old subjects, and it's never going to be resolved about what happens when a writer is born into the family. The family is, Miloš used to say, the family is over.
Yeah.
When a writer is born into the family is finished. And Philip Roth quoted that line. And the truth is, writers lie about that because writers like to aggrandize themselves. The family's not always finished, just as you discovered. People can survive being written about.
Absolutely.
But I think sometimes the writer wishes the family is finished.
Right.
By the truth being aired.
No, the truth is always more mundane than these dramatic. Joan Didion, many, many years ago, said, a writer sells everybody out, And in some ways, that's a dramatic statement, and it's shrewd, and it's entertaining, or better yet, the things she always would say, how did this book or that book originate? How did it get started? And she'd say, I was sitting in an airport, in South America at 2 o'clock in the morning, and a woman walked across the hall, and I thought, who is she? Well, that's bullshit, So just like everything else that we all say about whatever it is. But anyway, that is very romanticized. It's.
But it's powerful also. I mean, you might need we all have different reasons for writing and needs to write, and different stories we tell ourselves about why we write.
Yeah.
I'm okay with that.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. Just our mothers are not,
Yeah, exactly.
Does your mother worry about what you write?
No, I don't think so. But I haven't written about her, so that may change.
No, but you do think you could have hit on a subject that would make her nervous about you writing it, and she would try to urge you not to?
That's a very good question.
Yeah.
Probably. I mean, but again, I've always been surprised by people's emotional reactions because you really can't predict them, I think.
Oh, really?
And I do think don't you think sometimes, if you're inclined to protect someone, you may realize they don't need protecting. It seems almost like that's what you're describing in Fierce Attachments. I mean, I know you weren't inclined to protect your mother, but it seems like...
Oh, yeah. Well, that's true. That's a good point.
Protecting.
No, not in any large way, only in the family way. As you said,
right.
The emotional constructions that people make in their heads, the emotional concerns about the family, they're always just emotional. I mean, we're hardly ever talking about... We're not talking about firing squads and people coming after members of the family.
Well, it's just, I love having this conversation in an apartment that a family lived in, that a family shared. I cannot, and one thing I'm also thinking about as we're sitting here is, for us, this is our past as the daughters, granddaughters, great-granddaughters of Jewish immigrants to New York City.
Yes.
But this is also the present for other people who are living in New York City, who are living, closely packed in vulnerable circumstances.
It's
and
most
of
the world.
Very hard to do, yeah. But in New York, it's not like we've all moved beyond this. What would be hard to do would be to sit in a corner here with your typewriter, writing a story about your mother as she was right there.
Oh
in
yeah.
the kitchen.
No, well that never would have happened.
For that to happen.
Yeah.
You got to get your own place.
And a window. You need a window in the room.
A window and your mother not literally right next to you in order to write about her. That I think we can agree on. Well, we're going to take a couple of questions. I know there are questions.
Oh.
Let's have them.
Do I need a mic? Okay. If your father had lived longer, would Fierce Attachments have been a different book?
Probably. Yeah, it might not even have been a book. I mean, if he had lived, I can't imagine that our relationship would have remained as claustrophobic as it was, as it became. And you know.
Vivian, I'm just going to repeat the question just to make sure everyone can hear it, and so pause your answer. But the question is, if your father had lived, would fierce attachments be different?
Sure, yeah. I think it would not have existed, or certainly in some other form. And there was no doubt he was not the major figure in my, you know, in my emotional imagination. She always was. She filled the world from the very beginning. Nevertheless, she would have been paying a lot more attention to him than to me. So it's a good question, though. What might have happened?
I think if you just say it loudly, and Alex.
Yeah, just say it loudly, and I'll repeat it. Yeah.
Okay, I was wondering, also thinking about that time frame and the fact that your mother then she put on this persona and went downtown and, was independent, and, how in a way did that play a role in terms of modeling for you a certain type of behavior? And maybe, I think we're always reacting to our parents, good or bad, accepting or not accepting.
Yeah.
How much do you think that played a role in
absolutely. It was an influence. I don't know if it was a role.
Oh,
sorry.
Just 1 second, so I can. So I'm just going to repeat it just so everyone, because I have the special mic.
Right.
Your mother did have a degree of independence. The question is, the questioner is pointing out the fact that she did go downtown to work, and since we absorbed these influences from our immediate family members, what influence did that have on you and your own independence?
Yes, it had a great influence on me. The first part of life for me was strictly class. It wasn't sex, it wasn't race, but what dominated our lives was class. So as Alexandra has mentioned, the first line of the book I wrote about the communists was, before I knew I was either Jewish or a girl, I knew I was a member of the working class. And that was the way it was. So when Mama went to work, she went to work as a member of the working class. I didn't think of her as being a strong woman. I thought it was, she always acted towards me as if to say, we are people who know how to stay alive. I know that no matter what happens to you, you'll know how to stay alive. I always felt that from the very beginning. From the time I undertook to live a freelance life, which was frightening. I was never going to know financial security, and I didn't. But I never paid a lot of attention to it because of her. Because she, in other words, he was dead. We had nothing. She knew what she had to do. She did, and she taught me. We did what we had to do. We didn't lay down and die. So in that sense, she was, of course, a strong influence. I mean, but it was as a working class person, more than male or female, more than man or woman. Yeah, that was the biggest. And then when I deserted that, I think she couldn't forgive me that more than anything else, that I deserted class struggle. when I said, Ma, there's more important things in the world. She said, like what? Like what? Men and women, Ma. What?
And did she see you just deserting the class struggle because you weren't going to protests and rallies? What did that mean for her?
I was explaining the world in different terms.
I see. So ideologically.
Yeah. Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
When I deserted the idea that that class struggle was the center of everything.
Got it.
That was it was incommensurable. It was just something not to be ever grasped or understood or accepted. I did make her a feminist more than not. I mean, I made her, before she died, come to understand that of all the influences in her life, having been a woman was the strongest, the most important. And that went up against a lot, Jewish, working class, everything, immigrant. But I made her see that, but she couldn't get with the program, as people say. She'd have to keep remembering. Oh yeah, right. I'm a woman. Yeah, well, I'm a woman. For her was, my brothers used to say, when she was young, the whole thing was, when she was young, she read Anna Karenina. And what did she learn from Anna Karenina? A woman suffered. That's what a woman did. She suffered. And That was her idea, and she was hardly alone in this, right? She was as romantic about tragic love, thwarted love, lost love, as if it was the Crusades. I mean, it was love in the Western world. At the same time, she was never stopped being a working class woman. How people things, well, they just do.
And walking is such an important part of the book, right?
Oh yeah.
And the walking is the beauty, which as much as there might be tension or struggle, walking is almost therapeutic in an exciting way.
Yeah.
And I love how your books, so many of them, talk about walking.
Oh yes,
and
that's true.
Walking is the true New Yorker identity.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, like, having gone through the pandemic, did you walk the cities? Did you walk the city during the pandemic? Were you in the city? What are your observations on the city from that walking perspective?
Yeah, I kept walking.
The question is about walking, and walking being central both to Fierce Attachments and to many of your books. Room in the City, and walking being central to you. You love to walk.
Absolutely.
To observe, it gets your brain going.
Right.
And so did you walk during the pandemic? And what was that like?
Yes. What was it like?
Well, what were your
You all know. It was a shock to my system to come out in the street in those early months and onto 7th Avenue, major artery of the city, and it was like science fiction. It was like a movie set. Not a soul on the street, not a car moving, nothing. And I absorbed it like a dream. I mean, like everybody else. I mean, I didn't have any special experiences, but I didn't stop walking. And what I did notice was people, usually I encounter somebody, somebody says something or does something and I respond. That's usually been my experience, my style, everything. I noticed this time around, people sidled up to me. There were so few of us on the street.
Yeah.
Between, like where I live, between 12th Street and 23rd, I would have an encounter, but not of my own making and not face to face. Somebody would sidle up sort of and start some, not a conversation, just exclamatory sentences, like the kind of thing that I myself would do, but in never as a starter. You see that thing down the street? Yeah. And that thing down the street that somebody was often talking about was a morgue. Yeah. I mean, what do you think that is? I said, gee, I don't, then I'd get into it. But it was very quiet, always very quiet. There was no noise, no sound below 34th Street, up to 34th Street. And it was just always a matter of wonder. But I did think, boy, am I a New Yorker, sound, sight, no sound, no sight. I'm on these streets. And I knew then it was, me in the city forever. Yeah. But walking is everything.
We have one final question from our audience virtually. Bonnie wants to know whether your mother liked your two husbands.
All right, the final question.
Taking us back to a very practical question.
Good question.
The final question is, what did your mother think, or did your mother like your two husbands?
She didn't like either of them. I shouldn't really say that. She liked the second one better.
Well, the first one was an artist. Did that have something to do
and
with
Gentile, that was the big thing. My first husband was Gentile, and she shocked me. She really shocked me by her objection on that ground. Yeah, on that ground. I was really came as a big shock. And terrible, terrible things happened between us at that time. She said things that I would not put into a book. She said terrible things. I said terrible things. It was really a shocking experience. But she pulled herself together, and I got married twice, and each time it was City Hall and a party in the house. So the first time, she pulled herself together and she made a big party. And that was a lot of fun for everybody but the bride and groom. Everyone, everyone had a good time but us. It was so abstract somehow for us. But the good time was had with all these women cooking in the kitchen. It was just really like an old-fashioned thing. And the second, that was very painful. The second time around, I can't remember exactly what her objection was. He was Jewish, so that we got that out of the way. She didn't think he was reliable. He was, and he wasn't. You know, she was right. But anyway, it was nonsense. But I will tell you this: when I left the second husband, I called her up and said, "Mom, leaving Bob," and she said to me, "The next one is on you," and hung up. She did.
It's amazing.
She was a winner. Yeah,
That's amazing.
yeah. Actually, the next one's on you, and hung up. Yeah.
Well, on that note,
don't worry. Yeah, right.
Don't worry, exactly. On that note, thank you so much, Vivian.
Oh, my
What a
dear,
fun
thank you.
conversation. A total pleasure.
Good. Let's go out and have a drink.
Absolutely.
We need